All right, welcome to our fifth session on no conflict between the Bible and science. And today we're going to continue in our outline. We're going to pick it up on page, I think it's page 11 for you. It's either 10 or 11, but we're on thermodynamics is where we're going to pick it up. But before we dive in, let's open in prayer. Father, I just want to thank you for bringing us here safely this morning. I thank you for those who are watching with us. And Lord, I pray that as we are in the pursuit of truth about what the Bible has to say and what science has to say, and to try to reconcile those things, we need your wisdom and guidance in that process. And I ask that we would be gracious with those who hold different views, and yet at the same time that we would encourage each other in the pursuit of truth. And we know that all truth is your truth. It's objective for everyone all over the world. And therefore, it leads to moral standards and principles that are very important for us to be able to live by. And so, God, thank you that creation points to you, that our conscience points to you, that we are without excuse to deny your existence. And we also are at great peril if we run from you rather than to you. So I pray that anybody who's watching, that you would draw them to yourself, and that you would help them to know how to know you personally through Jesus Christ, our Savior and Lord. Amen. Okay, so just by way of review, I want to go ahead and point out a few things here by way of review. We're talking about the fact that we're looking in this series at essentially four different main views on science and the Bible, and how do you reconcile those. And so one of them so here we have naturalistic and evolution. N stands for naturalistic, E for evolution. And there's basically three varieties in the category of those who buy into what we call macroevolution. And what we're critiquing is macroevolution. We're not critiquing microevolution. We're not saying that there isn't change within kinds or species, but what we're saying is that to get like a single-celled organism and everything has come from that macroevolution, where different kinds become different kinds, different species become different species. That's naturalistic evolution. And honestly, a Christian, that would be a contradiction to believe in that and believe in God, because their very premise is there is no God. Okay, so they're trying to figure out science from a presupposition that says there's nothing supernatural out there. Okay? But within that, there are varieties of people that buy into evolution. So there's non-directed teleological. Actually, let me make sure I get this right. Where's my phone? Oh, you had my phone. Yeah. Let me make sure I get these right. These are actually new terms to me. So there's a book I'm going to be recommending. I'm actually going to do a whole thing from that book on just what he calls the 6 major views on origins. And it's a guy who's a scientist, he's a Christian, but he talks about what he calls non-teleological evolution. So that's this. So the teleological argument for the existence of God is that we know there's a God because of design. So telos means the end goal, or that it's designed for something. And so when we talk about the design argument or the teleological existence argument for the existence of God, we're talking about design. So there's one view. It's a chart that keeps flipping on me, and it's really small, so it's hard to see. Okay, here we go. So non-teleological evolution is that the universe created so sentience was inevitable result of evolution, and a group became human gradually. Okay, so that's sort of that view. And then there's the planned evolution view, and that is more the planned evolution, and then this one is directed evolution. And theistic evolutionists, so these are people that are not naturalistic. So they would believe in the evolution part, but not the naturalistic part. They would say God started it. So planned evolutionist and directed evolution would be two classes of, there are believers, believing scientists, Christians, that hold to those views, okay? And we'll dive into that. And again, the most well-known of the naturalistic evolutionists today, I would say, is Richard Dawkins, just by his book sales. And he's the guy they interview all the time on TV and whatever. So he would be probably the most popular representative of naturalistic evolution. And the biggest popularizer, I would say, or probably the most well-known theistic evolutionist. So he would either hold to, I can't remember if he holds to planned evolution or design, but that would be Collins, Francis Collins. Okay, so he's a Christian, and their organization, like if you want to read their stuff, it's Biologos. Wow, man, these things are horrible. Biologos. Okay, .org or .com or whatever. If you just type in Biologos, their website will come up. So if you want to read Christians that buy into either of these forms of theistic evolution, that God either created the stuff of which evolution has come about through macroevolution, or that God created the stuff, but he's also working in the stuff. He's guiding the stuff. And so there's two varieties of theistic evolutionists, these two. And again, I can't remember which one Francis Collins is, but when we talk specifically about that, we'll get into that. Okay, so this is sort of like the extreme end of where I'm from. I'm here, I'm a young earth guy, so I'm like way far away from this personally. I'm just not convinced of their arguments. And then you have old earth creationism. And there's a few different varieties of this. There's people that hold to the gap theory. There's people that hold to progressive creationism. There's people that hold to varieties of this along with PE or DE there. But again, the biggest popularizer of this in the world today is Hugh Ross. And he's based here in California, in Glendale. And his organization is called Reason to Believe. And again, if you go to that website, you'll get, all these websites are full of videos and articles and book recommendations and all kinds of stuff. So again, more than you'll ever be able to read. I mean, it's just, again, I feel like I'm drinking from a fire hose. I mean, every day I'm just researching, I'm reading. There's so much out there, there's no way you could read it all, but I'm just at least letting you know who the main players are in these views. Then you have intelligent design. And intelligent design, the founder of this is considered to be Philip Johnson, who was a law professor at Cal Berkeley. And, but probably the biggest popularizer today of intelligent design, the most well-known person would be the president of the Discovery Institute, which is in Seattle, Washington. And it's a think tank of people in the intelligent design movement. And they're not so concerned about what the Bible has to say about science. These guys are scientists. There's atheists that are part of this. There's agnostics. There's Christians. There's Jews. There's Muslims. There's all kinds of people of all different worldview systems. But what unites them is they say, I don't buy into this. I don't buy into naturalistic evolution. I believe that there's an intelligence. In my study as an astronomer, in my study as a chemist, in my study as a biology professor, whatever, these guys are all saying, what it points to for me is that there's an intelligence behind the science. And so these guys usually are theists of some stripe. They believe in a personal God, but some don't. And so I'll give an example. So one example of a guy who is part of the intelligent design movement. This is the book I recommend more than any other book when it comes to the issue of science, the Bible, the whole thing. And the reason I recommend this book is this guy is Michael Denton. is an Australian molecular biologist. He's also a medical doctor. He's lived in London, Toronto, Sydney. He's very well known. When this book came out, it was a bombshell in the scientific community. As a matter of fact, I would say this book has done more to influence people out of this direction in this direction than any other book that's been written in the last 50 years. Okay, so this came out in 1986. Highly, highly, highly recommended. If you don't have a science background, it might be a stretch. It might be a little bit too technical for you, but I believe you could read this. And why? Because I could read it. Okay, and I'm not a science guy. Okay, I'm telling you, science is not my forte. I'm being totally honest about that. But I'm reading everything I can, trying to understand this, trying to add to my knowledge. But I love this book because he has no stake in the game. He's not a Christian. He can't be accused of, you're sneaking God in the back door, because he doesn't even know if there's a God. All he's saying is, hey, as a molecular biologist, I study this stuff, and there's this problem with evolution, there's this problem with it, and again, I'm talking about macroevolution. And what he does is he points it out scientifically. And then he just recently wrote a book 4 years ago, I think actually 5 years ago, called Evolution Still a Theory in Crisis. So he wrote this in 86. He wrote that in, I think, 2016. And what he does is he adds evidence since he wrote this book that show, again, from, as a scientist in the scientific community, from scientific research, from the main journals. And he says, well, we still got a crisis here. And so that's why I recommend this book, because again, my strategy for all evangelism, again, the goal of all of this is we're trying to reach people for Christ. We're trying to get people to not believe lies and not be deceived and to know what the truth is. That's the bottom line. That's why we're doing this. And the reason we're doing this, we're spending our time on this, is because this is the main held view in America today. This is what our children and university students and graduate students, anybody going into any field of science or technology, is being indoctrinated in naturalistic evolution. And they're not even being exposed to any of the rest of this stuff. I mean, you have to do this on your own. You're not going to get this in a public institution at all. As a matter of fact, it's forbidden to be taught. So it's not really an education out there, it's indoctrination. We're doing the same thing the communists do in China. Okay, exact same thing. Okay, so where are you going to get this? Well, you're going to get it here at Marin Bible Church. We're going to talk about this stuff. Okay, but again, I just want you to know that my strategy of evangelism is I like to take wherever somebody's at. So if somebody's over here, if they're totally a naturalist, they don't believe there's any supernatural. My goal is hopefully to get, if they're NTE, I get to get them to PE, to DE, to OEC, to ID, to YEC, and I want them to keep moving in the direction of absolute, total truth. Okay? But again, better than all of this, I want to get them to Jesus, okay? But it's usually a process. So, and again, I've done this in my life. I've taken, of course, God's the one who did it, but he used me in the process to bring an atheist, to then be an agnostic, to then be a theist, to then go, okay, I'm looking at the different religions. Wow, Christianity really is compelling. And then some of those people ultimately end up becoming Christians. But I've got a lot of people in my life that are in these different areas that I'm working on. And so wherever they're at, I'm trying to get them this way. And I think that's a good strategy, because it's not a good strategy, I don't think, it's like what I call the stair model of truth. Okay, so if you have a stairs going up like this, if somebody's here and I want to get them here, it's a big jump from here to here, unless they're an Olympic athlete, okay? And they are gold medalists in high jumping. But what I want to do is I want to get them from, naturalistic evolution to believe in, wow, I think there's actually a designer here. I think there's a God, but I still believe in all the old earth stuff, and I want to reconcile what modern science is saying. And then I get them to sort of doubt this and read some stuff on this, and then the goal is to get them to intelligent design. And then I want to get them here. And it's the same thing, if somebody's an atheist, they're here, I want to get them to be a theist. I want them to see that there's a personal God. And then from a personal God, I want them to compare the religions, and I want them to see the Trinity, the triune God of Scripture, and believe in that. And then once they get that, I want them to be a Christian. Okay? So basically, you're moving people up the stairs of truth, of belief. Okay? That's the goal. Then again, so then you have intelligent design. And again, they're not getting into the Bible at all. They're basically a think tank organization of scientists that are saying, how can we get science that points to intelligent design in the public square? And they're successful at it to some extent. The problem is, if you're part of ID or YEC, Young Earth Creationists, you're canceled from culture. And even these guys, even Hugh Ross, is canceled from culture because, well, you're a Christian, so of course you're going to believe. But what most of these guys, if you look at their testimonies, and in your bibliography, I think I have like more than 20 resources of scientists that have become Christians. They're stories of science. There's actually over 200 stories in those, because some of those books have 50 scientists, some of them have 40 scientists, one has 21 scientists. These are scientists, and if you read their stories, most of them were already practicing scientists before they became Christians. So in other words, they didn't change their science only changed in the sense that, wow, now I got to interpret this from there is the supernatural. And then many of them start moving this direction as a result. Okay? So I'm going to be just giving you resources all the time. Another book I want to recommend here is this book, Theistic Evolution. Okay, this is a little book. Let's see, how many pages is it? It's almost 1,000. Okay? Nine. Oh, it is 1,000. With the scripture references, it's 1,007 pages. Okay? So a little book, light reading for nighttime. Okay, but what this book is, it's pretty cool. One of my professors at Talbot, J.P. Moreland, edited this book. He's been very involved in the whole science Bible thing, and brilliant guy. And so him and Stephen Meyer, who's from the Intelligent Design, sort of the main guy in there. Wayne Grudem, who wrote our Systematic Theology, is a part of editing this as well. So what they did is they took scientists like James Tour, your prof at Rice, and so what they have is they have a chemist, they have a guy who's a biology professor, an astronomer. They go through all these guys, and the first part of the book is scientists who show through their science, and they critique theistic evolution. So they're going beyond naturalistic evolution to Christians like Francis Collins, who hold to macroevolution as a Christian, and they're attacking that. They're critiquing that. And the reason they're doing that is because not only does this totally dominates all the public square, but in Christian circles, unfortunately, theistic evolution dominates. So if you go to Biola, Wheaton, any Christian school now, they have professors that teach theistic evolution. And these guys are saying, okay, it's because what happens with a lot of people, it's no different than the homosexual movement. Okay? If you allow for women pastors, the next step, always, it happens in every church. It's only a matter of time, usually less than 5 years, that then they start ordaining homosexuals and they start marrying homosexuals. In the scientific community, if you're theistic evolution, so many of these people then end up rejecting God and they go naturalistic evolution. See, because once you allow for something that's not true to dominate your thinking, it's only a matter of time before it takes you in a direction you never thought you'd go. And I think Satan has a foothold in the Christian community because of theistic evolution. I think everybody who writes in this book knows that. And so I just want you to know the science portion of it, very technical, very heavy. But then it gets into the philosophical reasoning against theistic evolution, and then there's a theological critique. And this book is worth it for Wayne Grudem's critique. Wayne Grudem just does a masterful critique of it, and he shows how it completely contradicts what the Bible teaches, especially with relationship to soteriology, salvation. Yeah? Tim Keller? Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, man alive. That took a long time to do that. But, oh, and I didn't even talk about this. Young Earth creation. So young Earth creation, that's where I'm at. The biggest popularizer of that today is Ken Ham and Answers in Genesis. So all these people have websites. Young Earth Creationism and the Answers in Genesis website is just fantastic. I mean, you'll get more information there than you ever even imagined. And one of these days I'm going to bring, they actually have a special right now where they have 20 books. Their little books are all about 100 pages apiece on every subject related to everything we're going to talk about. 20 books for $20. And you can order it. If you go to Answers in Genesis, you'll see that website. But it has every single subject, biology, chemistry, astronomy, you name it, from a young Earth perspective. And it's really good stuff. So, but that's where I'm at. And again, we should all be able to get along. Christians should all be able to get along in this. But what we're after is we're after the truth. And we want to question each other and dialogue with each other. That's the goal. Okay, so we're on thermodynamics. It's either page 10 or 11. What is it on your outlines? Because I've done two different outlines. 10? Okay. So thermodynamics. And again, I'm going to read really fast here, so just try and follow along. But again, what we're doing right now is we're just critiquing some of the points of macroevolution. And this is our I think third week going through this outline that we have. So the first and second laws of thermodynamics are foundational to all of science and have never been contradicted in observable nature. The first law, also called the law of conservation of mass energy, states that matter and energy are neither being created nor destroyed. In other words, matter and energy do not have within themselves the ability to create. This implies that they must have been created. The first law of thermodynamics points away from evolution to a creator. The second law, also called the law of increasing entropy, states that entropy, which is the measurement of disorganization, always increases in an isolated system. A system which does not have an external influence that can sustain or increase its available energy, such as the universe. Now, what does this mean? Simply put, it means that the natural course of anything is to degenerate. An old automobile in a junkyard eventually rusts away. An animal is born and eventually grows old and dies. A star burns out and vanishes. In short, the universe is running down. But if the universe is running down, it must have had a beginning. It is not eternal. This implies a creator. It also contradicts evolution, which depicts life moving upward rather than slowly degenerating. Okay? And again, we'll look at these laws of thermodynamics as we go along too, because there's more to be said about that and a lot of good examples from scientists that explain that further. Then you have the anthropic principle. So one of the most compelling evidences supporting creationism involves the anthropic principle, although it is sometimes used as an argument supporting evolution. The anthropic principle observes that the earth is fashioned so precisely that life as we know it could not exist if the earth were even minutely different. Evolutionists acknowledge this and then argue that although the universe is incredibly complex and wonderfully ordered, we should not be surprised that life came into existence through random process. Why? Because the very fact that we exist demonstrates that evolution occurred. In other words, in an infinite universe, the diverse circumstances needed for life to occur were bound to fall into place sooner or later, even if only once, no matter how unlikely that may be. Okay, so the fundamental problem with this argument is obvious. It is merely a philosophical statement that relies on circular reasoning. It assumes that evolution accounts for the origin of life and then states because life exists, we have proof that evolution is true. To counter this, we can offer our own philosophical statement. Robert Newman does this well. If such a being as the God of the Bible exists, then an apparently designed universe such as ours would be a likely result, rather than such a surprise as we have in an accidental universe. So hence we're right back to arguing which model, creation or evolution best fits the available evidence. And here is where the creationists can use the anthropic principle to their advantage. The value of the anthropic principle as a support for creation lies in its recognition that life can exist only within very narrow margins. For example, if the Earth was located closer or farther from the sun, life could not exist due to excessive heat or cold. If the chemical composition of the atmosphere varied only slightly, the air would be poisonous to life. If the sea-to-land mass ratio, depth of the oceans, and the Earth's cloud cover were different, the Earth's ability to store and release heat would change dramatically. All such events could result in the absence of life on Earth. Rather than all of these variables being the result of accidental processes or luck, it appears much more probable that the Earth was specifically designed to sustain life. And if it was designed, there must be a designer, that is God. So this is the main argument of the intelligent design movement. They basically take any study of any area of science and they say, ultimately it points to design. The evolutionists, Richard Dawkins says it's apparent design. They won't admit that it's designed, but it's apparently designed. You know, it looks designed, but it's not. It's by accident, it's by chance. Okay, so actually this concept, continuing, this concept can be carried a step further. According to the evolutionary scenario, when the Earth was formed, it did not initially possess the right chemical balance for life to exist. A hardening ball of gases would hardly support life. For the Earth to reach a stage in which it could support life, some form of inorganic, non-living evolution would have had to occur. This would be necessary in order to achieve the right combination of ingredients from which organic molecules could emerge. Even if we can envision organic evolution, that is, the evolution of living plants and animals, it takes a colorful imagination to accept the premise that non-living elements such as gases and minerals evolved to a point where they could support life. I'm convinced that evolutionists demand we believe in the absurd. Now, this is an interesting quote from Sir Cecil Wakely. And again, I don't know what these degrees stand for. Eddie, you probably know. I don't know what a KBE, does anybody know what a KBE is? Okay. How about a CB? Chemistry bachelor's, maybe? These are English degrees, okay? So we need Rachel. We need Rachel Ducker.
Knights of something.
Okay. Yeah. Knights of the, he's a Knight of the British Empire.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, so this Knight of the British Empire, which sounds pretty impressive, doesn't it? Was the past president of the Royal College of Surgeons of Great Britain. And he said, quote, "Scripture is quite definite that God created the world, and I, for one, believe that to be a fact, not fiction. There is no evidence, scientific or otherwise, to support the theory of evolution." Okay, so let's look at that chart real quick, and this sort of summarizes what we've looked at the last 2 weeks. So with creationism, and again, actually these three categories, old earth creationists, okay, so they're creationists. They believe that the earth is old, the universe is old, but they believe that God created. Okay, so these guys are not heretics. Hugh Ross, I love Hugh Ross. He's a great guy. I disagree with him, but he's still a great guy. Okay, I love R.C. Sproul. I disagree with him on infant baptism and covenant theology, but I still think he's a great guy, and I want him on my team. Stephen Meyer, great guy, intelligent design. He leans towards, he's more of an old earth guy, but again, great guy, great defender. He believes in God. Scott Enbaum, who's in our church, one of our elders, went to Whitworth when he was at Whitworth. And so he got to listen to him while he was there. But again, where I'm at is young earth creationism. I believe these guys have the best arguments, the most cogent arguments that align the Bible with science. But again, we can get along if you're here, or even here. We can get along. But let's talk about it. Let's discuss it. Let's debate it. And let's be civil about it. Okay? But again, for Christians, bottom line, naturalistic evolution is not an option. That's off the table. But again, my goal with anything that I think is true, if I think I could substantiate that truth, I want to get people towards that truth. And if I'm wrong, I need to be corrected in that. And hopefully I need to move a different direction. But again, this is an intramural debate among believers, okay? And we've got good people that believe these different things. And that's why I say, read this, read their stuff, read all their stuff, you know, get into it, watch videos, interact with it. And so when you look at the creationism, that chart in your outline there on page 12, the evidence for fossils. In creationism, you don't expect transitional forms because we believe God created kinds. Okay, so we're not going to see a dog becoming a cat or a cat becoming a dog because that never happened. All dogs come from the kind canine. And so any dog you see can mate with any other dog and have other dogs, and we could breed all kinds of dogs. But even the breeding typically is done with intelligence behind it. And the reality is we're never going to get anything but a dog. With humans, breeding humans, you're only going to get humans. And humans, they can have sex with animals, but it's not going to result in a new species. Okay? Why? Because God designed kinds to mate with kinds after their kind to produce their kind. And that's just Genesis. Okay? That's what it teaches. And that's what we see. That's what we actually observe. Scientifically, that's all we observe. We don't observe transitions in fossils. We should, because there's millions of fossils. And Darwin said, if my theory is right, we're going to see these transitions. You know what? Here we are 150 years later. We don't see any transitions in the fossils. Okay, so we don't expect transitional fossils because there aren't any. Okay, so it stands to reason that all the fossils we find are adult, usually of their kind, or sometimes immature version of their kind. But again, it's all their kind. There's no transitions in the fossils. But for evolution, they need to have these transitional fossils to prove their theory. The problem, of course, is it's missing. Okay? And Günter Beckley, in this article, he's a paleontologist, got fired from the largest museum in Germany. He was the head of that museum. Paleontologists, considered the top paleontologists on the European continent, fired for pointing to intelligent design. Not even saying there's a God, not arguing for creationism, but just saying, hey, let's admit that there's no transitional forms in the fossil record. And boom, you're gone. So he works with Stephen Meyer now. But his article in here is brilliant on paleontology. Okay? I'm going to keep going, so save your questions because I want to get through this information first. So if you have a question, write it down. Okay, mutations. Creationism on mutations. Most mutations are bad and destroy organisms. I've done more research on this week. I read 5 different chapters in books by all the different views. And again, I have yet to be convinced that there's any substantive mutations from one kind to another. There are mutations that take place. If you study E. coli and different diseases and whatever, you have examples of mutations within the same type of bacteria or whatever that is beneficial or non-beneficial. Again, 99% of the time, mutations are always bad and they destroy organisms. Okay, so that's just the usual is it's bad. The Earth is not old enough for good mutations to account for evolution, according to creationism. In evolutionism, without an abundance of good mutations, there is no way to account for evolutionary change. So they don't have an abundance of mutations. They have some examples they give, and we need to give them that, okay? But again, what we need to see is they need an abundance of mutations to prove their theory, which they don't have. The age of the Earth. More and more research on this, and I will deal with this when we're going to probably spend more time on the age of the Earth than anything else. You know, how do we figure that out? What are the different ways we date? We're going to talk about radioactive dating and carbon-14, all that kind of stuff, but not yet. But what we're finding is that the creation model fits with both an old and a young earth. So again, these guys use their belief in God, and they buy into an old earth model, but they're able to fit it into Genesis and the rest of what the Bible has to say. And these guys are as well. And I think these guys do better than these guys. But again, and these guys as well, they're sort of all over the map here. But what they're saying is, no matter how you date, you can fit it into the Bible. There's a way to interpret it. Now, again, not all, it can't be old earth and young earth. Okay? And then there's positions in between those. There's a guy, Gerald Schroeder, who has a PhD from MIT, he's a professor at MIT, and he holds to a literal six days, 24-hour creation, and old earth. And you go, how does he do that? And he proves it mathematically through physics. Okay? I'm reading his book. It's blowing my mind. And I don't get it. I'm going to have to ask Eddie to help me out with that. Okay? But then there's another book that I'm reading right now called A Creation Unfolding that is a young earth guy. And he sort of attacks a lot of this model, but what he does is he's developed this theory of time, like when you see time-lapse photography. Well, do I want to really get into this right now? Well, let me just finish the point. I will talk, again, we're going to get more into this. But he writes this whole book, and it's just absolutely fascinating. Right now, it's like, okay, I totally believe this guy's right. But basically what he's saying is that, like, for instance, if you were to take Jesus, if you were to take Jesus and examine his DNA, you would get then DNA from, or genetic passing on from the line of Joseph and from the line of Mary. In other words, was Jesus truly human? Absolutely. And honestly, I never even thought about that before. It's like, wow, could you imagine studying Jesus' DNA? And so in other words, if you study Jesus' DNA, it wouldn't be anything different than if you're studying our DNA. It would totally show itself as human. And I just think that's a fascinating thing. But then what he does is he says, when you look at all the miracles of the Bible, water turned into wine, creation. So when we study, scientifically, when we study these things, they seem to be extremely old. And what he says, they are. However, they're only old in sort of a time-lapse fashion way. That it goes through the whole process of aging, but it happens much faster than naturally it would. Why? Because it's supernatural intervention from God. And so anyway, I think it's just, this stuff, I love this stuff, okay? It blows your mind when you read this stuff. But what I'm saying is all these guys have all these different theories on this. And when you read one guy, it's like, oh, that makes sense. And then you read the next guy and go, that makes more sense, you know? And you just keep reading this and going, wow, okay, I don't think we're too far off on this thing. You know, I think there's a good explanation here. But again, it's just interesting. I'd love to get all these guys in a room and just have a, question fest. Okay, so age of the earth in the creation model fits with both an old and young earth because we have creationists that talk about both models, and they have pretty good reasons to defend their positions. And then you have evolution. You absolutely have to have an old earth. It's absolutely necessary to defend their position. Okay, thermodynamics demonstrates the universe had a beginning, that it was created, and it's running down. Whereas in evolution, it violates the evolutionary assumptions that the universe is eternal and uncaused, which was the primary theory before the Big Bang. Steady state theory. Okay, and then the anthropic principle explains the order and design in the universe as the product of an intelligent creator. God created the earth specifically to sustain life. And then in evolutionism, evolution requires that the ingredients necessary to support life are the product of random processes. Okay, so let me continue here, and then we'll have time for questions in a second. But I just want to run through sort of the atheistic underpinnings of naturalistic evolution. So the atheist, this is down at the bottom of page 12, the atheist often criticizes a believer by remarking, how can you believe in creation when there's no God? To say there is no God is to say one has enough knowledge to conclude there is no God. But an atheist can never have sufficient knowledge to be certain there is no God. He would have to be omniscient. For if there is something outside his area of knowledge, that something could include God. An atheist would have to be everywhere, in and out of the universe, all at one time, for there is anywhere he can be, God could be there. So in other words, he's making a statement that he can't back up because he doesn't know all knowledge, and he hasn't been anywhere. So that's a problem for the atheist. So no atheist can claim total knowledge. Therefore, atheism is self-refuting. Knowing everything and being everywhere is to be like God. Since no one can prove God does not exist, the question becomes irrelevant, and so does atheism. Thus, creation cannot be ruled out as a potential alternative. All right, let's look at the origin of God. And that's going to be the topic today in the sermon as well. The Bible makes no attempt to prove the existence of God, nor to describe his origin. It simply says God has spoken, God has acted. The first chapter of Genesis uses the word God 32 times. It is the most God-centered chapter in the Bible. The idea of creation is inconceivable without God. That's Werner von Braun, Vice President of Fairchild Industries. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, many of you have read his writings, winner of the 1970 Nobel Prize for Literature, gave an address in London in which he endeavored to explain why so much evil has befallen people in the Soviets. Over half a century ago, while I was still a child, I recall hearing a number of old people offer the following explanation for the greatest disasters that had befallen Russia. Men have forgotten God. That's why all this has happened. Okay, so here's a guy who suffered tremendously at the hands of communists. And in a nutshell, why? Because men have forgotten God. Why is our country a mess? Men have forgotten God. Okay? That's why we need Genesis. We need a God-centered book that points us to truth, that points us to the right foundation, the right starting point. So in the atheistic faith, and it is a faith, it takes faith to be an atheist, and I don't have enough of it, atheist evolutionists believe that no supernatural power exists, all creation is the product of chance. And again, remember, what is chance? It's nothing. Okay, so all creation is the product of nothing, is what they're saying. Living matter comes from dead matter. Intelligence and conscience appeared without sponsorship. Matter is self-created, self-determinate, and indestructible. And again, all these are unproven scientifically, okay? Philosophical assumptions that don't hold water. So the conclusion for the atheist, nothing produced something. Intelligence, design, conscience, and personality are free from any external influence. Life follows a deterministic law. So it boils down to choosing to have faith in accidental miracles or created miracles, God or a man. Again, in 2 Peter 3, in the last days, and we're in them, scoffers will come, scoffing and following their own evil desires. Again, it's always interesting that why are people atheists? It's never the evidence. It's their immorality. So in the last days, scoffers will come, scoffing and following their own evil desires. What is that? Sin. They want to sin. They will say, where is this coming he promised? Ever since our fathers died, everything goes on as it has since the beginning of creation. But the day of the Lord will come like a thief. The heavens will disappear with a roar, the elements will be destroyed by fire, and the earth and everything in it will be laid bare. Since everything will be destroyed in this way, what kind of people ought you to be? You ought to live holy and godly lives as you look forward to the day of God and speed its coming. That day will bring about the destruction of the heavens by fire, and the elements will melt in the heat. But in keeping with his promise, we are looking forward to a new heaven and a new earth, the home of righteousness. I love that. I want that home. I do not want to stay in Marin, you know. Now, Marin would be pretty awesome if it was a home of righteousness, wouldn't it? I mean, we'd have the beautiful of creation, but we'd also be getting along because we'd be living for the glory of God. So evolution, continuing, and again, I'm going to try and go through this quickly. Evolution is an animistic religion requiring completely uncritical faith, offering an absurd life and absolute death as rewards for belief. The evolutionist says he does not believe in God because he cannot believe the supernatural miracles which violate or deviate from known laws of nature. However, the theory of evolution violates every known law for its existence. Okay? The atheistic faith is more incredible than Christian faith in light of the evidences. So is evolution scientific? No matter how one looks at it, the theory of evolution must trace back to a point at which inanimate matter becomes living. Here is the absurd story of evolution. This is Henry Morris. Unknown chemicals in the primordial past, through unknown processes which no longer exist, produced unknown life forms which are not to be found, but could, through unknown reproduction methods, spawn new life in an unknown atmospheric composition, in an unknown oceanic soup complex, at an unknown time and place. Okay, so that's Henry Morris, who's sort of the father of young Earth creationism. Okay, so what are the odds of evolution? The odds of evolution. One of the best known evolutionists, Julian Huxley, he was sort of the Richard Dawkins of the day. He's the one who really popularized evolution. He was sort of the salesman for evolution. Surmised that the probability of natural selection leading to higher forms to be one chance in a number so large it would occupy 1,500 pages of print. Yet, he made the following statement which shows the amazing depth of his anti-God religious zeal. Quote, this is in his book, Evolution in Action. No one would bet on anything so improbable happening, and yet it happened. All right. Evolution requires plenty of faith. A faith in proteins that defy chance formation, a faith in the formation of DNA codes which it generated spontaneously would spell only pandemonium, a faith in a primitive environment that in reality would fiendishly devour any chemical precursor to life, a faith in the origin of life experiments that prove nothing but the need for intelligence in the beginning, a faith in a primitive ocean that would not thicken but would hopelessly dilute chemicals, faith in natural laws, including the laws of thermodynamics and biogenesis that actually deny the possibility for the spontaneous generation of life, a faith in future scientific revelations, which when realized always seem to present more dilemmas to the evolutionists, faith in probabilities that reasonably tell two stories, one denying evolution, the other confirming the Creator, faith in transformations that remain fixed, faith in mutations and natural selection that add to a double negative for evolution, faith in fossils which embarrassingly show fixity through time, regular absence of transitional forms and striking testimony to a worldwide water deluge, a faith in time which proves to only promote degradation in the absence of mind, and faith in reductionism that ends up reducing the materialist arguments to zero and forcing the need to invoke a supernatural creator. So it's really a battle between two religions. The controversy over creation and evolution is really a battle between two religions. One must choose the chance, randomness, no God, evolutionary philosophy, which provides the basis for the religion of humanism, in which anything goes. Homosexuality, nudity, abortion, incest, etc. cannot be regarded as evil, for evil does not exist. Or one must choose the absolutes of the Creator God who made everything and therefore has the authority to dictate what is right and wrong for his creation. The choice then is between the religion of Christianity with a basis in the gospel, in a literal creation, or the religion of humanism with its basis in evolution. Sir Julian Huxley, one of the world's leading evolutionists, head of UNESCO, descendant of Thomas Huxley, Darwin's bulldog, said on a talk show, quote, I suppose the reason we leaped at the origin of species was because the idea of God interfered with our sexual mores, end quote. Well, I appreciate the honesty. Okay, what do scientists think? And then, yeah, so we're almost done here, and then we can open up for questions. Here's some quotes. Michael Denton, again, who wrote this book. Again, highly. If you only get one book, And all the talking I do, get this book. And again, the reason is this guy's agnostic with reference to whether or not there's a God, which is hard to fathom when you read his stuff. It's like, why wouldn't you believe in God after all this, you know? But again, he's attacking evolution as a microbiologist and as a medical doctor. So he has 2 doctorates, and so he's attacking it from that perspective. So again, this is Michael Denton. He says, ultimately, the Darwinian theory of evolution is no more nor less than the great cosmogenic myth of the 20th century. So his view, and when you read his stuff, and he's written a lot of books. I know, Dan, you're reading Destiny. I don't know how far into it, but that's another tack on evolution. But he's written about 15 books, and I've read half of them. But again, this book, maybe it's because it's the first book of his that I read, and I was a young college student at the time when I read it. It's so compelling. I mean, honestly, it annihilates evolution, naturalistic evolution. It just annihilates it. From a guy that was teaching and believed in evolution. So I think this is a powerful book because this guy has no stake in the game. People can't say, well, he attacks evolution because he's a Christian or because he believes it. Well, he doesn't believe in God. He's attacking it as a guy who was in evolution, who bought into it hook, line, and sinker. He was indoctrinated in it, he believed it, and then he started really being critical of it, and he realized, wow, this is really a weak theory. So that's why I always recommend that book. What?
What's the name of
This is called Evolution, a Theory in Crisis by Michael Denton. Yeah. Okay. What scientists think, and again, so he says, I already told you what he said. Dr. Willem O'Neill is the research associate in developmental genetics in the Netherlands. He said it is becoming increasingly apparent that evolutionism is not even a good scientific theory. So not only is he saying it's not true, it's a poor theory at that. Dr. Isaac Manley of Harvard Medical School said this, what I have learned in the past 10 years of review of recent scientific knowledge of cellular morphology and physiology, the code of life, that is DNA, and the lack of supporting evidence for evolution in the light of recent scientific evidence is a shocking rebuttal to the theory of evolution. Arthur Field has pointed out evolution is based, quote, upon belief in the reality of the unseen, belief in the fossils that cannot be produced, belief in embryological evidence that does not exist, belief in the breeding experience that refused to come off. Marvin Lubenow, in his book Bones of Contention, says the human fossil record is strongly supportive of the concept of special creation. On the other hand, the fossil evidence is so contrary to human evolution as to effectively falsify the idea that humans evolved. Professor D.M.S. Watson, a famous evolutionist, made the remarkable observation that evolution itself is a theory universally accepted, quote, not because it has been observed to occur or can be proved by logically coherent evidence to be true, but because the only alternative, special creation, is clearly incredible, end quote. All right, this is Robert Jastrow. This is a very famous quote. I bought the book just for this quote. But Robert Jastrow says this, for the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak. And as he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries. Okay, that's Robert Jastrow, who, by the way, is an agnostic, but he was the head of NASA, of the theoretical division of NASA, their Goddard Institute. And then Michael Behe. So Michael Behe is actually leans towards theistic evolution, but his book, my second favorite book after this one from a scientist, is by Michael Behe called Darwin's Black Box. And he talks about the complexity of life at the molecular level. And he's convinced, so he's one of the biggest guys in the ID movement and intelligent design movement as well. His book is very easy to read. Usually these guys aren't easy to read, but Darwin's Back, it was actually a bestseller, and I highly recommend it. You can read it. Again, there's some technical stuff in there, but you'll get the gist of it for sure. But really compelling book that attacks evolution at the molecular level. But here's what he has to say. Can all of life be fit into Darwin's theory of evolution? If you search the scientific literature on evolution, and if you focus your speech on the question of how molecular machines, the basis of life, developed, you find an eerie and complete silence. The complexity of life's foundation has paralyzed science's attempt to account for it. I do not think Darwin's mechanism explains molecular life. Okay? So that's where we're ending today. And next time together, again, next week, you will not be meeting. So don't sleep in next week. But don't sleep in the following week. I'll be gone. I'm doing the men's retreat. We have a missionary from Venezuela who was in Venezuela many years who will be speaking during the service. He's a great guy. You'll enjoy him. But he's doing the Hispanic service first, and then obviously he speaks Spanish if he was in Venezuela, and then he's going to be speaking in the English service. So those sort of go together. So this class, don't be here next week. Sleep in. Write down. I can sleep in next Sunday. But the following Sunday after that, I'll be back, and I'm gonna basically then do another reviewing of naturalistic evolution. And then from there, we're going to get into the different views of why the different dating. Why do some people think the Earth is old, and why do people think it's young? And then sort of everything in between, the people that try and put those together. All right, so we got a few minutes for questions. And again, just know up front, I am not a scientist. I'm reading everything I can. I probably know more than the average layman on this subject, but I am not a scientist, so if I don't know the answer to a question, I will do my best to research it and get back. Yeah?
I just want to give a plug for one of the books on your list,
okay,
which is Stephen Meyer's latest book,
okay,
The Return of the God Hypothesis.
Okay.
He does a real good job of summarizing what physicists think about creation and describing how some of them have reluctantly come to acknowledge the possibility of a creation event as science has advanced. Okay,
good. I haven't read that book yet, so I've read bits and pieces. And again, I'm usually very hesitant to ever recommend a book that I haven't read, but when I've read enough of somebody and I know the gist of it, oftentimes I'll recommend it. But I have to be honest with you, I haven't read that book. But you've read it and you recommend it, so good. I'm glad to hear it. Is there anything I've recommended that you don't recommend? Okay, I hope not, but yeah. Eddie.
So, just starting from high level, so evolution theory,
yeah,
I agree with a lot of the scientific holes that it has that you're listing out.
Yeah.
So I wonder, despite all these scientific flaws, how do you think evolution entered into our education domain to an extent, like it's being taught in high school?
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm just wondering how.
Well, I usually don't say things off the record. Everything's on video. I will probably get pulled off YouTube if we get enough viewers at some point. But anyway, for now, we're on YouTube. I really think that behind evolution and behind every lie is the devil. So I think it's demonic, and I think the reason it has such a stronghold is because the devil has such a stronghold. Our three greatest enemies as Christians is the world, the flesh, and the devil. But the world and the flesh are heavily influenced by belief systems that are false. And I think that I really believe, truly, that Satan got a foothold in the life of Charles Darwin. So, can I prove that? Well, maybe not. But again, I look at the damage that naturalistic evolution has done. I mean, Marxism is a result of it. Anything deviant in sexuality is a result of it. Because we didn't have that kind of deviancy. I mean, even in America, before the 1960s, you would be ashamed to not be a virgin. if you were on a high school campus. Now you brag about it. You know, now you brag about your sexual conquests. Now you brag about changing sex. Now you brag about, you know, I mean, the next thing probably to come is pedophilia and bestiality. I mean, I bet you those things are legalized in our lifetime. How can something so corrupt from the way God designed it happen? I only have one answer: Satan.
Then segueing into that aspect,
Yeah.
I also wonder whether we're being, as Christians, we're being dragged into a discussion which yields no fruit. Meaning, this is not my insight from my wife, but she was pointing out, like, would refuting evolution in the end, with all these efforts that we're putting into, does that logically prove that creationism is true? Not really, because evolution is just one of the theories out there. And by refuting it, it still opens up doors to other options.
Right.
So are we being dragged into a discussion by the demon to something that is fruitless, whereas putting effort into really a different direction of discussion, which is using scientific evidences to support and really shine light on the events that are happening in the Bible to really strengthen the Christianism rather than focusing on refuting something meaningless? Wouldn't that be even more fruitful?
You know, it depends. It depends on who you're dealing with. Because again, if this is somebody's religion, and it is for a lot of scientists, this is their religion. So this is what they live for. This is their passion, and they're so passionate about it that they really won't read critiques. So they're just defending that. So we do have to deal with that. I think it's unfortunate that we do have to deal with it because it is such a weak theory. You know, it'd be nice if we could move on. But we're even having to defend that God created us male and female now. I mean, who would have thunk? You know, that I've got to read books telling me how to defend the position that you're male or female. That's the world we live in. It's so convoluted. People believe the foolish stuff left and right. So yeah, we have to deal with that. Again, though, it depends on who you're talking to, because there's some people that are taught that, like my wife was taught this. She grew up, but she thought it was just absurd that we came from apes. You know, so she didn't know the creation story. She wasn't exposed to the Bible. But for her, even though she was taught evolution, to her it just seemed ridiculous. And I think there's a lot of people like that. As a matter of fact, again, this is what's taught. We indoctrinate people in this, but 70%, all the surveys show in America to this day that 70% of the people believe in God. So even if they believe in evolution, they got to believe in some form of theistic evolution. So it's still a weak theory, a weak argument, but it's controlled, powerfully controlled by the elitists in our culture that will not allow any other view. So because of that, I don't think it's fruitless. I think we need this. If anything, because if these guys don't do it, who is going to do it? And for scientists only listen to... Nobody who's a scientist is going to watch me on video and go, oh, wow, you know, I've seen the light. If that does happen, it's a miracle. You know, it's an absolute miracle. But scientists do listen to scientists, but even these guys will not listen to these guys. These guys are, you know, come on, these guys are jokes. These guys are sort of jokes, and these guys they take a little bit more serious, but not much. So scientists tend to be very elitist. You're in that world, you know, you're working on your PhD at Berkeley, you know. So, but again, Philip Johnson, who started the intelligent design movement, was from Berkeley. You know, he's a professor of law. But he just said, you know, somebody's got to critique this. You know, as I'm reading this stuff, it doesn't hold water. So somebody from the outside has to critique this. So as a lawyer, sort of brilliant, really. It's sort of interesting that God would use a lawyer to start this movement that now involves a lot of scientists, professional scientists. But as a lawyer, he said, I'm going to take evolution and I'm going to do what I would do in any case in court. I want to show how these guys are wrong and convince the jury that evolution is found wanting. And that was Darwin on Trial, his first book. And then he wrote a lot of books after that. But basically, Darwin on Trial is a book that all of you could read as well. It's easy to read. But basically, he puts Darwinism on trial. He puts naturalistic evolution on trial as a lawyer and examines the evidence, and he says, okay. So he ended up being, I think he was an old Earth guy. He didn't end up being a young Earth guy. But again, God really used him, and a great guy. So I think it is fruitful, but yeah, bottom line, I mean, it's not about what you believe about science, it's what you believe about Jesus. And that's the ultimate goal with any of this. But if any of these block you from believing the supernatural, then that's where we need to start with. So we need to build a bridge with somebody where they're at. But I agree that ultimately the main thing is we're not trying to win an argument. We're trying to win people to Christ. Yeah, so good point. Glenn first, and then over here. Yeah.
Yeah, so off of that point, I did read that when it first came out.
Darwin on Trial?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And my question is, in these other writings, he did something maybe was unique. He had a chapter, maybe, they were divided into chapters of different things. He showed the fraud that these professional people, even on their deathbeds, admitted that they had, I think, Java Man, and there was these other ones, like Nancy or whatever.
Yeah.
Lucy. He put that, he showed, they were criminal.
Right. By the way, to be fair, one of the things that happens too, because there's these different views and there's more dialogue than there's been in a long time, I think that it is fruitful. And there are books that have people representing these positions getting together and debating these things in a civil way. But to be fair, there are young earth like I'm a young earth creationist, but there are young earth creationists that stretch the truth and that also use fraudulent arguments to prove their position. So I just want you to know that these guys aren't completely innocent. Okay, these guys, and we have to be careful about that. We have to be careful to study. I love when I read guys that say, hey, I'm here, but I struggle with, these guys have a good point here. I'm here, but these guys have a good point over here. And I don't know the answer to that. I love when I see that. So those are the guys I really like. Because they're really wrestling with, what's true? What does the science say? And do I have a presupposition here that's actually driving my interpretation of this, or am I really taking it at fit? And I think we all need to wrestle with, because again, I could give a rip about winning or being, or always having to be right. If I think I'm right about something that's wrong, that's bad. It doesn't matter what it is. So even as even when I preach the Bible, every week when I'm studying, I've got to read all these different interpretations. And I got to go, okay, God, help me. I don't know who's right. And sometimes it's like, well, this is pretty compelling. I think this is what's true. But sometimes I have to be honest and I have to say, I don't know. And I've held off on preaching Genesis for a long time because it's like, I don't know where I stand on the age of the earth. And I've been here and I've been here and I've been back and forth. And I still am to some extent. It's like, am I 100% sure of the young earth position? No. But I sure lean that way. It seems to make the most sense at this point. But I could be wrong. And ultimately, does it affect my salvation or your salvation? No. It's what about Jesus? Where are you at with Jesus? So again, this is an intramural issue in one sense. In another sense, it's a huge worldview issue because, again, we're dealing with most people are doubtful that there's a creator God that's involved in our lives. They believe in this nebulous, abstract God, if they do at all. And that's why it's important that we know theology and as much as we can about science because that's the world we live in. The experts that are put on TV are no longer pastors. In the 1700s, if you had to interview somebody in the city, you'd interview Jonathan Edwards. You'd interview the pastors. They were the most educated people in culture. That's no longer the case. The most educated, respected people in our culture are scientists. You got a white coat on and a PhD from Berkeley, you're the expert. Okay? Now, that may be true in that field and what have you, but I think that shows the difference in presuppositions. Our presupposition as a culture is there's no God, and we got to explain things naturalistically. So that's why scientists are at the highest level. It used to be, you'd be foolish to not believe there's a God. How can you not believe in a God? I mean, it's self-evident. I mean, just look around you. There's a God. And most people believe that way. And so the expert was the pastor or the theologian. I don't know that tide will ever turn again. But that's the way it used to be. And I'm okay with that in one sense. It sort of takes the pressure off of me. Nobody wants to interview me. If you interview the science, I get more time to do more important things than interviews. But it does show you that's where we're at, and that's why we're taking the time to talk about this. I think it is fruitful. I think it is important that we understand as much as we can, so that again, the goal is to reach people for Christ. And wherever they're at, build bridges with them. And I think it's hard to do that if we're so far over this way that we have no bridge to have dialogue. Yeah?
How would you answer, because this is a conversation I've been having with some people at school lately, how would you answer, when they ask, I've been talking about, there's no way that, evolution could just happen, there has to be an origin of something, right? And they're like, okay, well, where did God originate? And we know that God, didn't have an origin. He's always existed. But how would you answer that question?
Okay, yeah, great question. Again, the definition of God is He is an uncreated eternal being, personal being. And so when we study things, we really are studying things that are made, that have been created. So, but when we study God, we're actually thinking about and studying a being that He is the creator, He's uncreated. So the essence of who God is He's an uncreated, eternal, personal being. And then, of course, you get, and that's what the sermon's going to be on today. Today's sermon is going to be very theological. But I'm going to be talking about what was God doing before He created. So we're actually back, we're starting with Genesis 1:1. We're going backwards first before we go forwards. But so today's sermon will be helpful for you. But again, it really is the definition of God. Because atheists, like Richard Dawkins, will jokingly say, okay, well, who made God? And they sort of mock that. But that's just, it's really not a good question if you understand the definition of God. Nobody made God.
Okay, so is that versus the definition of everything else?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Everything else is contingent. Only God is independent. So we need oxygen, we need food, we need water. There's things we need, and if we don't get those, we'll die. Well, God needs nothing. He's the only uncontingent, independent, self-existent being.
Wow.
Yeah.
In the beginning of your talk, you talked about natural evolution was inconsistent with Christianity, and yet in the next sentence you said there are some Christians that believe that.
Believe it? Yeah.
I
Okay.
just wanted to,
Yeah, for clarification, there are Christians.
The views are mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that you can't be a Christian and hold on to natural evolution, but you're holding on to a false premise.
Yeah. So just to clarify, so there's naturalistic evolutionists, of whom Richard Dawkins is probably the poster boy. Now he mocks the whole idea of, and he even thinks that religions are just flat out evil. He's on a sort of a crusade to get rid of all religions. That's just superstitious nonsense, okay? But there are people like Francis Collins who believes in what we call theistic evolution. So he believes there's a God. He claims to have a personal relationship with Christ. He claims to be a Christian. And so he believes that God uses the process of evolution. And then there's two different kinds of Christians that happen to be evolutionists. There are those who believe that God creates the stuff, the natural materials, and then the natural materials do macroevolution to get to where we are. And then there are those that believe in theistic evolution, where God creates the stuff, but he also molds it and shapes it, and he uses the process of evolution, but he's involved in it. So there's sort of but again, the difference is, no, just to be super clear, a Christian cannot be a naturalistic evolutionist, because that eliminates God from the equation. That means there's no God. I believe the same as Richard. Well, how can you be a Christian then? Because to be a Christian, you got to believe in Jesus. And to believe in Jesus, you got to believe in the supernatural, because that means God took on human flesh. If there is no God, there's no or Jesus was just a liar because he said he was God, and So just to be clear, but there are theistic evolutionists. Okay, so not any naturalistic, but theistic, the T for theistic, like Francis Collins. And biologos, you could read their stuff on biologos. And there's two types. There's those that just believe that God created the matter, and then he's sort of like the deist, the God of the deists. He's off there in space somewhere, not really involved, and everything happens naturalistic, and there's no miracles or anything. Again, I really struggle with both of these, and that's why I recommend this book. Again, it's big. And as I find stuff that's smaller and helpful along the way, I'll point those out. But this book is really a good resource, especially if you're in the science world, because it really tackles all of the main areas of science and critiques them from scientists that are in that field. So most of the first section of this book, I probably got maybe 15% out of it, but that 15% was worth it. It was a lot of work, and it's just because that's not my world. That'd be like you guys studying Greek and Hebrew. I mean, it's just not your world, but it's my world. I mean, I have no problem studying Greek and Hebrew, but that's my world. So it's good for us to interact with this material. One last question, and then we gotta call it a day. Yeah.
I see. Okay. I wasn't. So as Christians, we can also have support evolution.
Yes.
I see. So one of the questions that I had, like the visual evidence in high school when they teach evolution, is this picture of like a monkey becoming human.
Right.
And then they actually corroborate that with fossils that are actually found that looks like not exactly monkey. They call it like Australopithecus.
Right.
And then evolving to like different types over time.
Yeah.
So is that kind of a not transitional fossil, but more of like a minor evolution that Christianity can support?
Yeah, so I would recommend you read Jonathan Wells' book, Icons of Evolution. He's a Cal Berkeley guy. He got his PhD at Cal Berkeley in biology. And so he writes this book, Icons of Evolution. What he does is he says what's factual and what's fraudulent about all the stuff that's in the textbooks that you're talking about. And I think what you'll find, you'll be surprised at how much is fraudulent. But he's also very honest. He's not a young earth creationist guy. He's an old earth guy. He's here, so he would be more along the lines of Hugh Ross, and he's probably even lean more this way too, with sort of designed evolution even. But what he does is he just sort of says, here's what's true and here's what's fraudulent from both sides. Here's where these guys really take a straw man and knock it down, but they're not even talking about this straw man. That's an argument that doesn't exist anymore. And I think that's one of the good things that's come of these different views of Christians, especially Christian scientists that are in that world, and they're reading the journals and they're doing the research and they're professional scientists. I take what they say seriously, and I wrestle with it. But again, ultimately, I think what I'm finding is, I think a lot of it is based on your presupposition. Is there a God or isn't there a God? And for the naturalistic evolution, many of them, some of them are nice people, and they're really trying to understand the truth, and they're wrestling with this. There's also a document. I encourage you to type this in on your computer sometime this week. Read a document that just type on Google, scientists who dissent from evolution, and read all the people that have signed it. There's over 1,200 scientists. These are all scientists that are in all the major universities of the world. But it's just, they're trying to get away from this indoctrination. You know, where it's like, it's naturalistic evolution or it's nothing. There's no other option. There's no other game in town. I think that's dangerous all the way around. And I don't like it, too, when Christians if Christians only read this, or they only read this, or they only read this, well, of course, you're going to hold to that position. That's all you're exposed to. I think it's important to be exposed. You know, and again, not everybody has the time and the interest, but for me, because lives are at stake, I want to be able to understand where people are coming from. Again, because what I'm trying to do is trying to build bridges to Christ from where they're coming from. So I think it's really important. But again, not everybody has a lot of time. That's why I'm doing this class. You know, I'm at least giving you some resources so you're thinking of the people you know in your world that you're interacting with. We all know people that fall in line with any of these points of contact. And so you're just trying to go, okay, God used me to be able to help this person come to Christ, you know? And how can we talk about this? So that's what it's about. Well, let me pray, and we'll call it a day, because I got to get going here. Father, thank you for, again, a good class, good discussion. Lord, I pray that as we continue to talk about this and think about it and wrestle with these issues, I hope that nobody here is just flat out overwhelmed, you know, because this stuff can be really overwhelming. But I do pray that bits and pieces of truth sink in, and the terminology and the different subjects that we talk about, Lord, that much of that would sink in, so that we can intelligently and cogently and logically and reasonably talk with people who don't know Jesus and point them to Christ, and that you would give us those opportunities, that we would be intentional about talking about you with others and bringing up this subject. And Lord, I just pray that as a result of this series, many people that we know would come to Christ, that they would come to know what it means to have a personal relationship with Christ, repent of their sins, and put their trust in Him. That's really why we're doing this. So I pray that you would equip us and encourage us to do that. In Jesus' name, amen.